CQ POTA, CQ Parks on the air. Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta.
Kilo Delta 4, Whiskey India.
Kilo Delta 4, Whiskey India 5x9 at Kilo 8291.
Roger. Got you 57 Virginia. Victor Alpha this morning.
Thank you for 57 into Virginia 73. QRZ Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta.
Hello, my name is K.Thomas, and this is W1DED in Maine. Today I have with me Bob WC1N, WC1N. Bob first came on my radar when I was planning a POTA activation trip up to the Moosehead Lake area in Maine, and I found Bob's call sign all over the leaderboards in that area. And then when I activated Lily Bay State Park on Moosehead Lake, Bob actually responded to my CQ, and that's when we had our first conversation. Bob is an extremely experienced POTA activator with over 543 parks activated to date, which I think places him somewhere around number 43 worldwide on the all-time parks activated list. Thank you for joining me today, Bob.
Oh, nice to be with you, Kev.
So tell me, let's start with your ham radio background. How did you get into the hobby and when?
Well, many years ago, I went to school for electronics, and needless to say, pretty much everybody in the class, the majority, we all became ham radio operators. The related teacher and the academic teachers and the shop teachers, they were all hams. And needless to say, we at that time we built all our transmitters, and some of us built receivers, and it was just great. We'd go home at night and we'd contact each other and experiment with different transmitters and antennas. That was many years ago, but that was the beginning.
Was your interest in DXing, contesting?
Well, in the very beginning, it was just a matter of making the radios work, to be quite honest with you. It's kind of amazing to me that you can build something from scratch. And at that time, we were just scavenging different parts from different radios and whatever it might be. And we put it all together, and theory worked. And then next thing we know, we were transmitting and receiving and having a ball. I did not go into electronics. Needless to say, at the time, I had a job in electronics, and the day before I was supposed to start, I got a telephone call saying that the job was no longer available. So I fell back to doing construction work, which I had been doing during the summers. And needless to say, I became self-employed, and that's where I ended up. And, so many years later, I'm doing construction and actually slowing down a little bit right now. And also, I was a pilot for several years, also on a part-time basis.
So I suspect that your slowing down a little bit gives you more opportunity to activate all these parks.
Well, that was the only reason I'm slowing down. I got to put all these radios to good work. So, and having a lot of fun. It really is. I just enjoy the outdoors so much. And to be honest with you, for many years, I was pretty much a workaholic. I do construction during the day. And then if I had a flight during the day, I'd go off to the different flight. I flew the Citation jets and twin engines and so forth. I flew for Maine Aviation right in your state for a while, a few years, and all over the place. And, it was a great job. And, I had the chance to fly at 45,000 feet at Mach 7.4 and had all sorts of different executives and very famous people. We shoveled around the country. But after a while, there was no time for home life, or I had no weekends. I had no holidays. I had nothing. So needless to say, I terminated that career after a while and kind of slowed it down a little bit and paid more attention to construction. And now I'm actually trying to pay a little bit more attention to ham radio.
So tell me about your transition into Parks on the Air. Were you one of the first adopters of the program, or did it take a little while?
Probably took me. It was a new concept for me. I had done CW many years ago, and when COVID struck, needless to say, we were all housebound. And that's when I went back into my shack and turned the radio back on and realized how bad I was at CW. And continued doing it a little bit. And, after a while, I got a little bit better. And then I was scared to death to go on and do an activation. And I contacted a couple of different activators, and they said, why don't you come on over with me and sit beside me? And it's not a problem. And I ended up not doing that, but I had the opportunity. And then one day I said, I'm just going to go out and do it. And I did it. And, you make mistakes and you move on. I mean, I make mistakes every day, and that's not a big deal. You just ignore and keep going on and try to be a little bit better the next time. And I think it started somewhere around the beginning of 2021.
And do you remember that first park? Where was that?
I don't know. I don't remember that. That's a good question, though. I really don't know.
So at what point, obviously you've activated a lot of parks comparatively to all the other activators. At what point did you decide that you wanted to be activating actually every day? I know you're in the running for the Bailey Sprout Award this year, only one of 5 hams that have activated a park every single day in 2022. When did that happen for you?
Well, I know for sure that it happened in July 14th, 2021.
Exactly.
But to be quite honest with you, I bet if I check my records, my record goes back further. So I'm coming up on very close to 500 consecutive days without missing a day. And that's when I had COVID, I still snuck out by myself. When I was sick, when it was raining, when there were snowstorms and there were blizzards. And I've got all the videos and everything else to prove it too. And I like competition. I always try to be the best at what I do, no matter what it is. And that's one concept I have. It doesn't matter what you do in life, as long as you're the best at what you do. And that's kind of like one of my goals. Not that I'm better than anybody else, but it's self-motivating for me. I wanted to fly a jet. Well, okay. Well, needless to say, I studied, I worked hard, I did a lot of training, and I was a flight instructor for many years. And next thing I know, I'm sitting in the right seat, and then I'm in the left seat of a jet and flying all over around the world. And same thing with ham radio. You start off, you're terrible at CW and terrible at voice. You don't know anything about antennas or propagation. It's all a big learning curve, and I'm still learning it. I'm changing up antennas. My antenna bag is heavier than all my radios right now. You're changing up, and whatever works for you.
I can certainly appreciate that. I think one of the fun aspects of Parks on the Air for me is it's ever changing. Every experience is just a little bit different. There seems to be challenges that I encounter, not at every park, but it happens often, and you have to problem solve that and get on the air and still not only make the activation, but now I have a goal of making at least 100 QSOs per park. So there's a lot that goes into that makes it a lot of fun. But I also know that you activate in a number of different ways. You're a SOTA activator, you're a POTA activator. You're one of the only people I know that does harsh weather activation. So tell me about that. I mean, you must have a lot of gear for different situations, I presume.
I do. I try to do a SOTA once a week. Here we are in the beginning of November. I will do another SOTA tomorrow. That will be my 40th for the year. Those are a little bit harder. It takes me about a day of planning ahead of time and packing because, one, it's a safety issue, and just repeat your question on the second half of your question, please.
Well, I'm a little interested in, again, the different types of activation, but let's stick with SOTA. What would be in your go bag for a SOTA activation? What kind of equipment would you take?
I got one right actually here, I think. Yeah, I got one that I'll be using. I mean, there's a list of many, many items. The key, the cable, the radio, the mic, antenna connector, string and throw weight, military cord, coax, end-fed patch cord, paper and pencil, reading glasses, walkie-talkie, cell phone, extra batteries, headlights for at night, headphones, loading coils, different antennas, tick spray, survival blanket, whistle. You never know what animal you're going to run into if you do it all. You gotta have the emergency gear in case you have to be rescued. If you're rescued and you don't have emergency gear, you'll probably be prosecuted and fined because the rescuers are risking their life to come out and get you, and really you're not equipped for the situation. Compass, pocket knife, map, GUIs, and snack bars. One of my first activations on SOTA was, I believe it was the first week in March. There was a foot of snow on the ground, and I had an idea that I was going to climb Mount Monadnock in New Hampshire. I believe it's 30. It might be 3,200, 3,500 feet, something like that. And here it is. It was cold, a foot of snow. I got all the gear on. I got there early. I climbed the mountain. I had 2 liters of water. I went up there. It was very cold at the top. It was windy. I set up the 705 at the time. I had an end-fed dipole that I strung between 2 of my poles for hiking poles because there was no trees at the summit. And I did it for 45 minutes, and that was it. I couldn't take it anymore. And then I started down. Well, needless to say, going down, I actually fell 4 times going down, because going down, it's more dangerous than going up. And there's no traction whatsoever other than your poles. And if you're on solid rock, there's no traction. So I fell 4 times. I kept going, and then I ran out of water. And I said, oh, I can't believe it. So I'm thirsty. I'm hot. I have all the right gear on, all the synthetic fibers and so forth. I'm warm and I'm sweating. I start eating snow. I had to have some liquid. And by the time I got to the bottom of Mount Monadnock, there was a spring there. So I sat down and I drank out of the spring for probably half an hour. And then I made it over to my car, or my truck at the time. And it was 6 o'clock at night. I'd been in the dark for 2 hours. You could have pushed me over with a small breath of air. I spoke to one of my friends that pretty much does workouts and into weightlifting and so forth. And he said, what did you eat? And I said, well, I had some pita bread and I had water. He says, well, you're crazy. You should have had bananas for your potassium. You should have had GUIs to replenish all the nutrients that you burned off. And 2 liters of water I thought was plenty, but evidently I needed more. So that was a learning curve. At that point on, things changed. Checklist, I ate properly, I had GUIs, I had extra supplies, and I never suffered that ill effect ever again. But it's a learning curve. Every time you go up, you're adding or subtracting from your checklist.
You know, I've got to say, in my own journey, and I've only been activating since, I guess, April of this year, and I've talked to a lot of hams to get some advice, and preparedness, checklists, prior planning is a theme that comes up consistently in every one of those conversations. If you're going to have a successful activation and keep yourself safe, as you put it, you have to spend the time to do it.
And that's a SOTA activation. Now, on the POTA activations, you know, because we've talked about it before, I go up to the wilderness of Maine, and that's 33 miles north of Rockwood, Maine, about 50 miles southeast of Quebec City. Now, I go up there until there's greater than a foot of snow on the ground. I have a 4-wheel drive truck, and about a foot of snow is my limit. And at that time, again, checklist, different checklist. And you go up there, and I live in an ice house. I set up an ice house. As soon as I arrive on site, first thing I want to do is survival is the shelter. I'll do everything to get that shelter up as fast as possible. That's number one. And I do bring a little buddy heater, and I put that in the shelter. You have to have that. And I run that during the daytime. I don't run it at night. They say it's safe, but even though I have CO2 detectors in the ice house, I never take a chance. After all night long sleeping in a sleeping bag that's good for 30 below, I wake up in the morning and there's 3 feet of ice around the inside of the ice house until I put the heater on. And then I have a table. I have all my radios set up in there. Antennas are outside. And I even got caught in a snowstorm last year. You know, I woke up in the morning and it was like 5 in the morning. I get up early each day and I heard something in the tent, and I looked out through the little flaps that you can put down. And sure enough, there were ice pellets hitting the ice house. I said, oh boy, I'm going to keep an eye on that, because I had just driven in on a foot of snow, just barely creeping over the snow on the dirt roads. And then 6:45, I looked out again because the sun doesn't rise to 7:30. I said, oh no, I'm in a snowstorm. I said, I'm going to be in trouble if the snow adds up any higher. I won't be able to get out with my truck. So I went into high gear for about 2.5 hours. I had to break camp, load everything up in that truck, and then, pray a little bit before I was heading out. And I made it outside. And it was a great experience. It was a little bit risky. I didn't realize it was going to snow out because I had been in there a few days. And needless to say, you really have to be prepared for everything. I bring a backup of pretty much every single thing with the exception of my generator. I have a little small generator I use when I'm about to go to sleep at night. I will run the generator because you can control it with your iPhone. I'll run it for 4 hours and run the cord into the shelter. And then from there, I'll charge all my batteries. So I have battery supply. And that's pretty much how it works.
I know we joked about this, but I do think there should be an extra merit badge for doing that kind of an activation. It's pretty amazing. And the advice you gave me for the portable ice shack was invaluable. I mean, obviously I haven't used it in a snowstorm yet, but I did take it up to Fort Point State Park for a late shift activation. It was pretty chilly that night. I got the small buddy heater that you had mentioned, and it really was invaluable because it was cold enough that I don't know that I would have continued activating. I guess I was on 20 and 40 meters that night, and it got pretty chilly, and that setup was perfect. It came together pretty quickly, and it was pretty warm. But I'm looking forward to using it in the colder weather. So talk to me a little bit about antennas, because I know that people are using all sorts of different options. I happen to be stuck on using a buddy pole vertical or bent dipole, which I absolutely love. What would you use, say, at Lily Bay for a harsh weather activation?
Well, when you say harsh weather, you're talking about a snowstorm, or you have time to set up prior?
You're in the snow. You're in a hurry to get under cover, I assume. You don't want to spend a lot of time outside setting up, I presume. But what does it look like?
The antennas pretty much change based on location, conditions, and the propagation. And I'll tell you a little bit maybe I should tell you a little bit of the history of how it worked with myself. In the very, very beginning, I made my own antennas. I made fan dipoles. Fantastic results. Nobody could believe it because I guess today people just don't make antennas. They buy the antennas. So I made the fan dipoles real simple, 462 divided by the frequency of megacycles, give you the lengths in half and half, and bingo, and you feed it with a nice coax center fed, and it's a balanced line, and you really got a great antenna. And I did that. But after a while, needless to say, it gets a little heavy. And then I said, well, okay, I'm going to try this new ham stick, $22 for a ham stick. So I tried those for a while, and they worked out great. I know different people use it on a regular basis, and they're good antennas for what they are. They're great, and people work the world, and they're a good place to start. And then from there, I actually let me see, different people had recommended the Chameleon line of antennas. Okay, Tom Weatherspoon down in North Carolina is a great podcaster, and he's got all sorts of different antennas that he experimented with. And he actually tested out of a Chameleon end-fed that was like 63 foot long, and I ended up purchasing that. And they're a little bit on the expensive side, but you're going to buy quality. They make all their antennas for the government, so the quality is right at the top of the line. So I did the 63-foot end fed for the longest time. But needless to say, the end fed, as you know, bounces off totally at 90 degrees straight up, and you don't have the long DX as some people go for. Next thing I switched over was to a vertical. I used the MFJ 1979, and I used it with a loading coil. And I had really great success with that. And that works out great. And let's just say I'm using the 17-foot vertical, and the propagation is terrible. So really, the angular radiation is very low, but it's not doing me any good because propagation is terrible. Well, then I'll switch over to the horizontal type antenna, the end-fed, and basically bounce the signal overhead and right back down, and you have greater success. And it also has to do with the time of the day. Early in the morning, I love going down to the seashore and trying to work into Europe. Works out great. Midday, when the sun is high, the absorption rate is high. It gets a little bit tougher. Later in the evening, the West Coast comes alive. Alaska comes alive. I pretty much work Alaska pretty much every week. It's some certain people up there I work, and they're just fantastic. And you change it up. And most recently, I've been doing the SOTA activations and teamed up with another fellow ham, Alpha Bravo 1 Whiskey X-Ray, Raijuji Suzuki out of Boston. He's a great guy, very, very intelligent. He picks me apart left and right, but we improve each other back and forth. I take him on the SOTAs, and we'll do a POTA on the way home. Well, he came up with a vertical type antenna that he designed, and with the raised radials, and it works out fantastic. So when we're going to be doing DX, we use that type of antenna on a carbon fiber pole, a 6-meter carbon fiber pole. And most recently, which I can't use all the time, I bought a 60-foot spider beam. So I hoist up a 40-meter vertical and having lots of fun with that. I've only been able to use it twice because it takes a lot of room to do it. And my next POTA/SOTA, whatever it turns out to be, it's definitely going to be POTA, up into the wilderness will be in a few days. And I'm hoping that I'm able to put up the 60-foot spider beam up there and spend some time up in the wilderness and see how well that works up there. But the antennas change from day to day, propagation changes, and you really have to have a bag of tricks. You got to change things, and I change it all the time. I never really know until I know what the band conditions are.
So is there a trick to properly putting up a 60-foot spider beam and getting it guyed properly? It seems like a lot.
Well, it is a lot. Now, actually, like I said, I did construction all my life. So as far as mechanical skills, I think that I have them. So what I did was, and again, I'm always trying to think of the best way to put something up. I don't necessarily go by the generic ways. I'm always trying to analyze what somebody's already designed to see if I can come up with a better idea. I believe I have. In the back of my truck, there's a 2-inch by 2-inch mast that comes out for any type of accessories, trailer hitching, what have you. Well, I designed a 2-inch by 2-inch tubing that comes out probably about 4 feet beyond my tailgate when it's down. And then it goes up, I believe it's like 7 or 8 feet. And from there, I took a 4-inch PVC pipe, heavy duty, Schedule 20, and I cut it in half. And I bolted it to that vertical 2-inch tubing. And then on the inside of that 4-inch PVC, I put some silicone there as a pad. And then at the base, on the ground, I have a coupling that I actually put the spider beam into, and then I can just walk it up like a ladder, and it gets caught into that tubing. And then I have Velcro straps around it. And at that same time, while I'm lifting it up, I have a string at the very, very top of the 60-foot mast, so I can hoist up an antenna in a heavier line. And it works out pretty well. I mean, I'm not going to do it on a windy day, but to have that ability to put up a vertical 40 meter antenna, that's incredible, I think, anyways.
Well, I appreciate the tip, because you wouldn't want to see photos of me trying to do the same in my backyard. It wasn't a pretty.
You got to have plenty of space, plenty of time, and you do not want any wind. If there's any wind at all, I'm going to wait until it's a little less on the velocity.
Bob, one of the things that's come up a little bit lately. Are POTA activators using linear amplifiers? Have you used one? Have you considered using one?
I have not. It's funny. The radios that I have a little history behind that too. When I do POTA activations, primarily I use the Yaesu 891. It's 100 watts. It takes a beating. It's reasonable in price, and it works out great. But just yesterday, I was using a KX3. I have a KX2. I have a 705. So based on the radios, I have more QRP radios than I have anything else. I use the KX2 on SOTA. I'll probably eventually use the KX3 once I become a little bit more familiar with it. In the beginning, I used the 705, but that weighs 2 pounds and 2 3/4 pounds. Well, that led me to buy my KX2, which saved me 2 pounds. And by the way, when you're climbing up the mountain, you got to carry everything. I'm carrying about 25 pounds on my backpack, and it's tough. I'm taking a break every 20 minutes to a half an hour going up. Going down, no problem, but going up, it's like climbing stairs with 30 pounds on your back. It's brutal. It really is. So every pound, everything I can save, I will. I mean, I have backups on everything. And people say that, why do you have backups? He says, I'm not going to climb all the way up there and not be able to activate. And that's how I suffer, by carrying things. So QRP works great, but the 100 watt on POTA activations is normally done by myself. I use the 100 watt radio, and I've never used a linear amplifier one time. Antennas are more important than your power, I believe.
So speaking of backpacks, as you know, I was a first-time activator of Mount Kineo and Big Spencer up in the Moosehead.
You had to remind me that. Out of all the POTA I've ever done, in my life, I've only been disappointed one time. I'm going to tell the audience what the disappointment was. I've been dreaming about activating Mount Kineo, which is a tall piece of rock in the middle of Moosehead Lake, for a year and a half. I was going to do it last winter with the ice until they had fault lines in the ice and had a couple people go in. And I said, I'm going to wait till the summer. And then one day I was on the radio, and I listened to a gentleman activating was it from Lily Bay, Kevin?
Lily Bay, yes, it was.
I think you look a little guilty, but you were activating from Lily Bay. And I said, oh, I love that place up there. It's so great. I go up there all the time. And my dream is to activate Kineo. And then Kevin gave me the sad news. Bob, I got some sad news for you. I'm going to activate Kineo tomorrow myself. And I said, oh, I can't believe it. Well, needless to say, Kevin was number one to activate Kineo. And that was really important because it's not an easy activation. You actually have to take a boat over there. I think is it a mile or 2 miles or something?
It's got to be somewhere between a mile and 2 miles, yeah.
Yeah, so you basically take the ferry over, and then you're on the island, and it's POTA and SOTA. Now, that's what I did after Kevin activated number one.
I got to be clear. I left the soda for you, okay? So.
Oh, well, thank you. You're my hero, Kevin. And that was a funny story too. Talk about crazy things. I went over there with Alpha Bravo 1 Whiskey X-Ray, and we were going to do a SOTA and a POTA. So there's 2 trails going up to the top of Mount Kineo. One's very, very steep, and it has a great view. The other trail is steep, but no view. So you can imagine which trail we elected to take. So at this time, I brought an extra battery in the back of my backpack. So I was a little bit heavy. Well, we climbed up the steep part, and I fell backwards. And luckily, I didn't tumble, but I fell. I hit my head a little bit. I cut my wrist. I sprained my wrist. And I had a hematoma on my arm that was the size of a baseball. So retreated, and that's a tough thing to do, is turn around. Turned around, went down that side of the mountain, went all the way around, climbed up the other side, and made my activation. And then I was telling the story to one of the rangers, and she said, "Hey, let me take a look at that. I'm an EMT." I said, her name is Caitlin. She's a ranger up at Saboomic. I says, "Caitlin, with all due respect, I don't want to take my shirt off until I go home. Because if I see something I don't like, I'm going to shorten my trip, and I don't want to do that." So needless to say, we made the SOTA, we made the POTA, but Kevin, I have to hand it to you. You did number one. You did a great job. You broke the ice for me. How's that?
Well, I appreciate the story, and
And that's how we talked. Basically, got to be friends back and forth.
Yeah, and to be clear, I think the reason you answered my CQ at Lily Bay was to ask me that question. Are you going to do Mount Kenya?
Yeah, I said somebody's in my territory up there.
Exactly.
But you have the same interest I do, so it's fine.
I do remember what it was like to carry. I think my pack was about 28 pounds up Kineo and up Big
tough.
Spencer, and I don't have the variety of gear that a lot of hams have. I've got a Kenwood TS480HX, which is pretty heavy. So you just start with that and a battery, and you're already carrying in some weight. I carried a Chameleon vertical antenna, which I loved. I don't use it as much anymore, but yeah, and the challenge was actually coming down Big Spencer and also Kineo, but Big Spencer, it was pretty steep initially coming off the summit, and when you have that kind of weight on your back coming downhill, it's a little bit of a struggle, especially after you feel like you've already achieved the victory. You've gotten to the top, you have your activation. Now I just want to relax my way down the hill, and it's not that way at all.
Oh, I did an activation last Saturday, and because this is fall, all the leaves had come down, and it was steep, and it had lots of loose rocks. So as the leaves go over the rocks, you can't see the rocks. So it's very dangerous going up and extremely dangerous coming down because the leaves make it so slippery. I could not do it without the poles. Matter of fact, I'm going to be taking my rubbers off the pole and just go with spikes as of tomorrow's SOTA. It's very dangerous this time of the year. So make sure you have the right boots because you'll definitely twist your ankle and be in trouble.
Bob, one of the things that we talked about recently were also a couple parks in the Moosehead Lake area. I think one was called Day Academy and maybe Lobster Lake. And it just brings up this topic of researching how to get into a park. Tell me a little bit about your research into accessing those two parks.
Well, those particular parks, first thing you want to do is get on all the maps and find out exactly where the activation zone is. It's a little bit broader using POTA as compared to SOTA. It's very, very well defined. And I usually spend about 1 day researching a SOTA, not so much with a POTA, but like Lobster Lake. You know, it's way up in the wilderness. It's beyond where I camp, and I'm 33 miles in. And also there's another park up there, St. John's. Maybe you've had your eye on that too. But there's no road to get there. And that's the problem. And these roads are rough enough as they are. You know, you're going up there with, I have a heavy duty truck, needless to say, but you know, you can run into all sorts of problems. I couldn't find a way in to Lobster Lake, but guess what? Somebody activated that. A W8 activated it last summer. Matter of fact, I told one of the rangers up there, and because the supervisor of the ranger, or all the rangers in there, she lives on Lobster Lake. So when she comes over to see me or visit me at my campsite next week, I'm going to ask her if we can have permission to go up there, and if we can get to the activation zone. You know, I never, ever want to cheat with POTA. I'm sure people do, but I physically take a picture of where I am. So if anybody ever questions myself, I could tell them exactly where I am. And I do the same thing with the SOTA. With SOTA, we have an app called the SOTA Go. That tells us when we're near the activation or we're within the activation, and how much more horizontal distance we have to travel, as well as vertical height. And I always take screenshots of each and every one of those. And I'm hoping that all the POTA guys and all the SOTA guys do the same thing that I do, because it's a great hobby, and I've heard that there's been a couple of people caught abusing the system, and that's not fair to the rest of us, because we work very hard to do everything the correct way.
I'm finding that to be particularly true in Maine, probably other states also, but I've activated all the parks within a 90-mile radius of my home, QTH. And now I'm looking at very remote areas of Maine,
Sure.
many parks that haven't been activated. And it's not clear when you look at the Google Maps. And, I've been doing a lot of research and trying to find entry points. I mentioned to you the other day, there was a park up in the Augusta area that I thought I had figured out, and I had to turn away. I couldn't find a safe way in. One of the things I've been trying to do is take meticulous notes, and I've created a customized Google map so that if people come to Maine, they could go to that Google map and at least read what I discovered. And hopefully that is helpful to some people, and I'll certainly be reaching out to some of those hams that have activated parks that look difficult to find out how exactly did he do it. And there's such a contrast too, as you know, between driving up to a state park, which is pretty well defined. The biggest issue I have there is if the gates close because of a seasonal closure in Maine. But these wildlife management areas in Maine can be very challenging.
It's difficult to find them too.
Absolutely.
The way I go about that, and I do research every single week, and I don't know if this is the research I got. I keep going, all the maps, continuously, all the time. I'm always updating everything. These are things I have not activated yet. So I'll do any type of information I get. I'll do the all trails. I use the Gaia. I'll use the POTA zooming in. I'll use Google Maps. There's another one out there. I forget the name of it, but I use every single way I can to get the information. And then it's not getting the information. Then you have to kind of sit down and imagine yourself walking through these areas. It could be swampy. It could be a river that you can't get across. I mean, I would suggest anybody that's going into the wilderness certainly I always bring maps, paper maps, as well as I have maps on my phone. I do not have an emergency locator beacon, but that's probably a good idea. A lot of my friends have them. I do not have it. It's a great idea to have. So unfortunately, a good one's about $800 with a $50 a month subscription, which is a great idea. But the research is, you have to have it. To be honest with you, I've had 3 times that I've gone off trail. I haven't gone off for a long period of time, but let's say 20 minutes. And then all of a sudden I realized I was off trail. And then what you have to do is you have to bushwhack back to get to the trail. And this is the toughest time of the year, because whether it's leaves or snow, this is very difficult. You can't see the trail. You cannot. So if it's not marked on the different trees and so forth, you really have to pay attention and keep checking your charts. It's tough to get from A to B. It really is. And don't think it's easy. And if you're going in the woods and the temperatures are cold and you don't have all that information with you, you're a fool, because you're liable to lose your life or risk somebody else's life trying to find you.
No, absolutely. I had a recent activation at Hurd's Pond, which is near the Stockton Spring area, mid-coast Maine. Couldn't find the access point anywhere. Ended up finding something on GPS that I thought would take me directly to the trailhead. It was not. It was a private property, somebody's home at the end of a dirt road. I went around the pond and just happened to see somebody outside in their front yard. And I knew people had been fishing on this pond because of photos on Facebook. And I asked her, did she know about the access? And luckily for me, she was an ice fisherman and knew the way in. And I don't like to get in the car and go someplace hoping that somebody there will tell me. I'd rather know ahead of time. Otherwise, it could be a wasted trip. And then as it was, I was planning 10 parks on this particular trip. So if I hadn't made Hurd's Pond, it wouldn't have been the end of
Now,
end of
how
the
long
world.
was your 10 parks? How long was it going to take you to do that?
So my intention was to do 10 parks in 3 days, and I did. But I added 3 more parks on the trip home. So I actually made it a 4-day, 13 park activation. I mean, it was all different types. Also, it was
Kevin, you were definitely worse than I am.
it was a lot of fun. There was a lot of planning. Even the place I stayed, I found a cabin in Stockton Springs that put me within shouting distance of most of these parks. But interestingly enough, the biggest challenge besides Heard's Pond was Swan Lake State Park, which had a seasonal closing, and I was there late in the day, and I could have hiked in, but I had no idea really how far it was and what I was dealing with. So I ended up coming back the next day and hiking in. But it was a wonderful 4 days. And by adding on the 3 additional parks coming home, it really put an icing on the cake, I think.
Now, let me ask you this, Kevin. Let's do a role reversal here. What's the reason that you want to take on 10 parks in 3 days? And I've heard you activate. I'm telling you, you're like a machine. You're spitting up. You're going a mile a minute. I mean, I wanted to say hi, and I thought I was slowing you down by just saying hi.
There's a couple answers to that. When I was involved with ham radio back in the early 80s, I really enjoyed contesting. So part of my rhythm in making the contacts have a lot to do with my contesting skill set. The reason I'd want to activate 10 parks in 3 days, now that I've activated almost all the parks within this 90-mile radius, I have to do what you do when you go to Moosehead Lake. I mean, I need to make it worth my while. I can't drive to, in this case, Stockton Springs, activate Fort Point State Park and turn around and come home. Well, I could do that, but that's just so much effort. And I can see that that's going to be my future in Maine. I'd like to activate all the parks here. I think we have about 143, but they're so spread out in such remote areas. I'm now looking at what the other pockets are. Where can I go and strike at least 8 parks within a short amount of time? That won't work all the time, but I think I can do maybe 3 or 4 more groups in Maine, and then after that, it's going to be a struggle. But it'll be probably a day trip or a couple days just to get one park, like Allagash Waterway. That's going to be a tough one, and I'll wait for a while on that.
So for me to recap your goal is to activate every single state park in the state of Maine?
I hope to, yes, yeah. I've got a long ways to go. I think I'm at 55 now out of the 143. And like I said, I've done what I consider the easier ones from an access standpoint.
I mean, I had a goal one time to do the 6-state region, which I did. And then that goal was over with, what are you going to do next? Well, you got to find something else. That's probably why I migrated into SOTA. It's more of a challenge.
Well, one of the things that came up unexpectedly this past weekend, I was going down to D.C. My wife ran the Marine Corps Marathon, and she encouraged me to bring my POTA gear along, and I had no intention.
Was she in the military?
She was not. A lot of her family members are, so that was important to her.
Nice.
It was a great race.
Great.
From a spectator standpoint, it was a lot of fun because I was able to. It runs through D.C., so I was able to see her 4 or 5 times. But I ended up throwing the gear in a Pelican Air case, taking it on the plane, and activated the Lincoln Memorial. And then went out to the Shenandoah Valley to see my dad and activated a park in Virginia. So my point in bringing this up, I can see this being the next thing for me, at least taking the POTA gear on trips and seeing if I can activate a park or 2. It was a lot of fun, and I'm becoming more comfortable with making sure I have the right gear that's going to work for a trip like that. Obviously, I can't have all the backups I have locally when I'm driving my car. It's got to be limited, and it's got to work.
Wow, that's going to be great. Sounds fantastic.
Talking to Jason Johnson right now, W3AAX, about a trip that I have planned in January to St. Vincent. Down in the Caribbean.
Oh, nice.
And I'm hoping there can be a park down there so I can do my first DX activation. We're still trying to work
Nice.
that out, but yeah, I'm motivated. So Bob, in closing, do you have any advice for first-time POTA activators?
Well, I guess don't be afraid to do it. You're going to make mistakes, and everybody's done it. So just take your time, go slow, enjoy it, and set some minor goals. And then when you reach one goal, go to the next goal. Take it slow and easy. And you're going to find out that you're going to develop a lot of friendships. I mean, that's another thing that I enjoy about POTA and SOTA. You know, I've got people on the radio that every day they're going to call me, every single day. And I start off by saying hi, you know, did it. And it's just so wonderful. And then the next thing you know, you're emailing back and forth. And then they'll ask you, or they'll send something to you. I mean, I had one gentleman, F4ILH. He's a gentleman, Gene, and he's in France. I work him everywhere. If it's a SOTA, he's chasing me. If it's a POTA, he's chasing me. You know what he did a couple of weeks ago? He sent me a flag of the country of France. So I said, I'm going to bring that on top of my next SOTA, and I'm going to hoist it up my SOTA beam, and I'm going to take a picture for him on top of the mountain, flying his flag with my station down below, and that's what I did. And he was thrilled to death. I mean, nicest people in the world. They just, I can't say enough for other ham radio operators. I really haven't run into any really bad apples. They're, for the most part, they're all great people. They really are a lot of fun, and we have a common interest. So we got to help each other.
You know, I have to agree with you on all those points. The community of ham radio operators, people offering advice, but also I've had the same experience. The people answering my CQ, activation after activation. November 5 Hotel Alpha comes to mind. I mean, he often is a 3-3. I can barely pull him out, but he is always out there. I really appreciate it.
I remember that call when I did. He's there all the time, and I think he's one of the high rollers. And N4 XLS, he's on set CW all the time.
That's right. November 4, Charlie Whiskey Bravo. I hear his call a lot.
Papa Echo, my buddy Roger down there, and KP4 Foxtrot Danny down in Puerto Rico. I mean, there's all sorts of people all over the place. And I got one guy in England, Golf Zero DJF. His name is Paul Griffin. We have had, I believe, over 350 contacts. Every location that I go, Paul and I try to communicate. When I'm on top of a mountain, Paul is sending me my reverse beacon reports so I can adjust my antenna or my strategy or whatever it might be. He is an incredible person. He's done ground crew, and then all of a sudden he started activating. So we have done park to park, basically QRP from, and we've done it SOTA, summit to summit also. He went up to a summit in England, and we did a summit to summit. Back and forth, and it's just amazing. It really is so much fun. It gives us a challenge all the time. Every day it's a challenge. You never know what's going to pop up on the propagation.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, I appreciate your time today. It's been great talking to you and actually seeing you in person. We've had a few conversations over the phone or over the radio. It's good to see your face, and hopefully we'll get to meet in person at some point.
Well, I hope there's more guys coming up the ladder like yourself, Kevin. You're just you're on fire for POTA, and I appreciate you being out there. Really, I do.
Well, thank you, Bob. I've been talking to Bob WC1N, a very active POTA activator and SOTA activator. I can guarantee you'll see him on the spotting page every day, so look for him. Thank you, Bob. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. 7-3.
Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta.
Alpha Golf 2 Sierra.
Alpha Golf 2 Sierra, you're 5x9 at Kilo 8291.
Roger. You're also 5-9 New Jersey.
Thank you for New Jersey, 73 QRZ Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta. CQ POTA, CQ POTA, CQ Parks on the air, Whiskey 1 Delta Echo Delta.